The black-haired man with the yellow eye yells for Ravis. He enters a brightly lit room where a red-haired woman sits alone. The narrative describes a lifestyle focused on gourmet meals and sugary desserts. It continues to mention a life spent primarily on personal grooming. A man with white hair stands in a decorated military uniform. The black-haired man praises Radis for her radiant and beautiful appearance. Radis reflects on the better part of her life while surrounded by flames. An oppressive darkness sets the tone for a discussion about wretched lives. An armored knight rides a rearing horse through a fiery sunset. The narrative explains the burden of being born into a difficult role. Red hair spills out from beneath the knight's metal helmet. Onlookers at an estate witness a rider arriving in the dark of night. The rider collapses in a heap of blood and metal while groaning. A man rushes toward the fallen horse, sensing something is deeply wrong. Panic ensues as people shout that the master of the house is dead. A maid discovers the red-haired woman's bloody face beneath the helmet. Margaret Tilrod smiles while serving a healthy meal at the family table. Margaret encourages her son David to eat his vegetables while he reads. Yuri Tilrod defends her brother, mentioning his interest in writing love letters. David snaps at Yuri and tells her to return to her own home. Margaret commands her children to stop their constant bickering at the table. A maid interrupts the meal with urgent news about an arrival. She clarifies that Lady Radis has returned in a critical state. Margaret's expression turns cold and calculating as she processes the news. She decides she must investigate the situation herself as her children watch. Margaret orders the siblings to behave and finish their meal while she is away. Historical records detail the legendary Prince Dantes Arpend and his 3 knights. The text falsely attributes the lineage of the Sword of Flame to David. Radis lies broken and bleeding in a dimly lit room. A servant suggests summoning a doctor or priest to help the dying girl. Margaret slaps the maid and calls the request for help utter nonsense. Margaret worries about the social fallout if Radis' true condition is exposed. She demands that the maid hide the evidence and dispose of bloody garments. Margaret looms over the bed, questioning if the child is still conscious. Yuri mocks David at the dinner table for ungratefully living off Radis' sacrifices. She reveals Radis fought in the subjugation force under David's identity. A memory shows David receiving flowers while the actual knight remains hidden. David bristles with anger after his sister calls him a coward. Yuri laughs at him, claiming his success was only possible because of Radis. David argues that their mother forced Radis into the dangerous role. Yuri warns David that his reputation will vanish once the truth is known. David physically lashes out at his sister in a fit of rage. He accuses Yuri of being just as complicit in the family's deception. David smiles cruelly and insults her marriage and her husband's character. Yuri seethes with hatred as the argument reaches a violent peak. Radis coughs up blood as her internal injuries become too much to bear. She realizes the expedition into the monster forest was a coordinated setup. Toxic webs and miasma fill the forbidden depths of the forest. Radis observes a massive spider monster amid the bodies of her fallen comrades. The dying woman laments being a fool for walking into a fatal trap. Radis reflects on the deceptive paths her life has taken. She questions if she ever experienced a moment without danger. Margaret instructs the dying Radis to eat soup and rest. Radis realizes that this ordeal will be impossible to endure. A blinding light fills the room, causing Margaret to gasp. Margaret asks about the stone, which Radis retrieved from an expedition. Margaret's greed grows as she realizes the stone's immense value. Margaret commends the child while Radis identifies a disgraced priest. Radis begs her mother to use the stone to summon help. She hopes a purification rite will be enough to save her. Margaret promises that word has been sent and help is coming. Radis repeatedly asks for the priest while Margaret claims help arrives. Radis realizes the rumors of a priest were likely a lie. A cold realization dawns on Radis about her mother's true nature. Radis despairingly asks why her mother is allowing her to die. She wonders how she failed as a daughter to deserve this. Radis reflects on an existence that was never truly her own. Margaret favors David and Yuri while viewing Radis as an afterthought. Margaret openly expresses her irritation and disgust toward her eldest child. The mother dismissively declares that she simply does not care. Margaret justifies her cruelty by claiming her actions were absolutely necessary. Radis reflects on her lifelong struggle to be loved like David. She wonders why she was never embraced or held with affection. Radis asks for her father, but Margaret insults the man's character. Margaret warns the dying girl not to blame her for anything. Margaret reveals that Radis's name refers to a flower for graves. She claims that Radis was always destined for this tragic end. Voices demand Radis sacrifice herself for the family's needs in silence. She is told to never yearn for more than her lot. Amidst agony, Radis realizes her hope for future happiness was false. She laments wasting her life living for her ungrateful family members. Radis screams that she should have lived for Osip. As she fades, Radis finally understands the vital truth of self-worth. In her final moments, a deep regret for her life takes hold. A brilliant light consumes Radis as her heart finally gives out. Morning light shines through a window as birds fly by peacefully. A single eye snaps open as someone awakens with a start. Radis sits up in bed, looking healthy and surprisingly young again. A grand announcement confirms Radis Tilrod has returned to age 16. Margaret looks out at a courtyard as she questions her husband's identity. Jade reflects on his own haggard appearance and their shabby mansion. Jade's limp is noted as a sign of his fallen status. Margaret watches from a window as Jade leaves the estate daily. Margaret wonders if her husband is visiting a local flower shop. Jade finds solace elsewhere as Margaret screams about his secret love. Margaret and Jade trade insults about their mutual hatred and marriage. Margaret reacts with intense fury upon giving birth to a daughter. Jade expresses his bitter disappointment while Margaret orders the baby's removal. Margaret demands the infant be taken away from her sight forever. A maid cares for baby Radis, shocked by Margaret's cruel neglect. A maid worries about her lack of experience while watching young Radis. The maids search the field after realizing the toddler has disappeared. A maid discovers the child hidden behind a wall near some flowers. Little Radis sleeps peacefully in a field of vibrant pink gladiolus. The maid laments the child's lack of a proper name and status. A small hand holds a cluster of bright red gladiolus flowers. The young red-haired girl awakens and looks toward the bright sky. Radis offers a bright and innocent smile while sitting in the grass. A maid informs Margaret that guests are complaining about the wandering child. The young girl hides shyly behind a piece of furniture in the mansion. Margaret reflects on her distaste for the child she gave birth to. A fork falls and clatters loudly against the cold floor. Margaret berates the child for spilling food and expresses her deep hatred. A maid finds the young girl huddled alone and crying in distress. Radis clings to the maid's apron, heartbroken by her mother's hatred. The maid looks on with deep concern and uncertainty for the child. The maid reassures Radis that no parent truly hates their own child. Radis resolves to try harder to earn her mother's affection and love. The child constantly frets over her mistakes and her mother's coldness. Margaret ignores the child as she walks through the grand mansion hallway. A transition occurs as a tree branch is snapped in the garden. News arrives that the Tilrod family's eldest son has finally been born. Household members begin planning a grand festival to celebrate the new heir. The mansion is a flurry of activity following the birth of David. Jade praises Margaret's effort while she admires their incredibly cute newborn. Radis watches from the doorway, noting how happy her parents appear together. Margaret's coldness toward her daughter contrasts sharply with her new joy. The young girl runs through the silent and empty hallways of the estate. A maid announces the birth of a beautiful daughter during the winter. Margaret calculates that a daughter is better for avoiding inheritance disputes. The newborn blonde baby Yuri stares up with bright green eyes. Margaret proudly declares that the new baby is her perfect spitting image. Radis plays while Margaret considers educating her alongside the other children. Margaret decides Radis might be useful if she learns a few things. A tutor attempts to manage a crying David during a library lesson. Radis asks the teacher for guidance on her own academic studies. The tutor informs Margaret that Radis is exceptionally intelligent and gifted. Margaret angrily dismisses the praise, citing Radis' older age as the reason. Margaret storms out in a fit of rage, leaving the tutor confused. Jade encourages David to become a great knight to protect the family. Margaret watches her husband leave with a look of intense, bitter resentment. She mocks her husband's physical disability while talking to her son. Margaret pressures David to become a glorious knight for her own status. A man named Armano introduces himself as the new swordsmanship teacher. Armano searches the field, wondering where his young student has fled. David avoids training by lying in the grass, much to Armano's annoyance. The teacher questions if David has any actual intention of learning swordsmanship. David looks bored and completely uninterested while holding his wooden sword. Armano loses his temper and yells at the uncooperative and lazy boy. The tutor clutches his head in total exhaustion and deep frustration. A focused blue eye watches a display of unexpected skill. In a sunlit field, young Radis practices her swordsmanship with a stick. Armano approaches the red-haired girl, expressing shock at her natural talent. The blonde teacher stops Radis from fleeing, inviting her to train together. Armano excitedly suggests that her presence might finally motivate the lazy David. Stunned by the rare praise, Radis reflects silently on the teacher's words. Overwhelmed with genuine joy, the young girl glows from the unexpected compliment. The scene shifts as the master and pupil begin an intense spar. Ancient records identify the legendary lineage of the Sword of Flames. A powerful aura surrounds Radis as the ancient flame reappears after centuries. The narration confirms that the young red-haired girl is a true genius. Armano encounters a woman in the hallway and asks for her identity. The woman warns Armano that praising Radis will lead to his immediate dismissal. Armano instructs Radis on the fundamental duties of a protector in combat. He teaches her that the sword is the center of her defense. Radis stands ready, gripping her wooden sword with a new focused determination. Armano emphasizes that Radis must prioritize protecting her own life above all. The two spar fiercely in the courtyard, their wooden blades clashing with force. Radis pauses mid-session, confused by the instruction to value her own safety. She wonders why David has never given these vital lessons on survival. Armano wipes sweat from his brow, offering Radis a warm Prout meal. Radis returns the smile, finally feeling a sense of belonging and achievement. From behind a tree, David watches his sister's training with a scowl. Resting in the grass, David views his sister's hard work as mere entertainment. Margaret informs the teacher of her plan to enroll David in the academy. Armano looks down, realizing he must deliver a disappointing report on David. The parents debate whether their 10-year-old son is ready for the elite school. Armano prepares to speak the truth regarding the boy's lack of progress. Armano bows, officially informing the parents that David has no swordsmanship talent. Margaret seethes with rage, comparing her son's failure to Radis' immense gift. The mother's anger explodes as she screams for Radis to enter Guru. Margaret delivers a violent slap to her daughter's face in a blind fury. She accuses Radis of seducing the teacher to ruin the family's bright future. Armano grabs Margaret's arm, desperately pleading with her to stop the assault. The unhinged mother slaps the teacher across the face for his interference. Margaret fires Armano on the spot, blaming him for her son's ruin. Carrying his bag, Armano stands alone outside the mansion's iron gates. Inside, Margaret wails about the years she believes were wasted on David. In the dim light, the mother looms over Radis with a cold demand. Margaret commands Radis to take the academy entrance exam in David's place. The mother turns her back on the girl, her footsteps echoing coldly. Margaret reaches into a drawer, searching for a specific tool for her plan. She orders Radis to cut her hair to facilitate the dangerous deception. Radis looks on in shock as her mother emphasizes her family duty. Margaret justifies the sacrifice, claiming it is for her brother's future success. Radis begins to cry, mistakenly believing her mother has finally acknowledged her. She recalls the maid's comforting lie that no parent truly hates their child. The young girl resolves to help her brother pass the elite exam. Long strands of red hair fall to the floor under the scissors. Radis accepts the heavy burden of being the eldest Tilrod daughter. The short-haired girl waves cheerfully as she departs in a carriage. The blonde woman offers a rare and brief word of approval. A small, hopeful smile touches the girl's face despite her exhaustion. The red-haired girl expresses regret for her teacher's sudden dismissal. The blonde woman looms over her daughter during a quiet evening. A mysterious letter with a red seal catches the mother's attention. The blonde woman notes that a reply from the teacher has arrived. A sudden, harsh strike from her mother leaves the girl reeling. Pained and silent, the girl endures her mother's unpredictable outbursts. The blonde woman callously burns the teacher's letter over a candle. The girl watches in despair as her only connection to hope burns. 4 years later, David throws a tantrum about his future duties. David refuses to hunt monsters, while Margaret insists on his knighthood. Terrified, David screams about the dangers within the forest of monsters. He laments the high cost of purification and the family's poverty. Margaret suggests hunting stones for profit, but David continues his refusal. The mother tries to soothe her son's frantic and cowardly outburst. A devious plan begins to form within the blonde woman's mind. In the backyard, the red-haired girl carves a wooden practice sword. Now older, she practices her swordsmanship alone in the garden. Margaret watches from the shadows, observing her daughter's exceptional natural talent. The girl stops her training, startled by her mother's sudden presence. Margaret describes a marriage proposal from a wealthy but elderly nobleman. The girl is horrified by the prospect of such a marriage. She grips her wooden sword, feeling the weight of her helplessness. Margaret offers a deal: impersonate David in battle to stay home. Under the captain's orders, the disguised girl learns to stand tall. In full armor, she strikes down monsters with lethal, trained precision. Captain Robert recalls how he trained her to survive the front lines. Robert praises her skills, believing her to be the talented David. Behind her visor, the girl reflects on the captain's genuine encouragement. Margaret and David celebrate the success built upon the sister sacrifices. Continuous campaigns are waged to pay off the family's mounting debts. The girl remains trapped by the financial needs of her siblings. A formal announcement confirms her appointment as vice captain under David's name. While Robert offers congratulations, the public cheers for her false identity. Narration compares her extraordinary prowess to the legendary Alexis Tilrod. Despite the public's adoration, she retreats to her room in solitude. Her grueling life continues until her body finally reaches its limit. Bruised and broken, she reflects on a life lived for others. A single eye snaps open as she awakens with a gasp. She sits up, amazed to find her body light and healthy. Shocked, she examines her hands and finds them free of calluses. She leaps from the bed, desperate to confirm her current reality. A mirror reveals her younger face and short-cropped red hair. She realizes with awe that she has returned 10 years back. The setting is the small attic room from her early childhood. She questions if this miraculous return is merely a fleeting dream. Looking out the window, she sees the bustling activity below. A servant carrying flowers confirms that preparations for a festival are underway. Radha stares out the window, wondering if the day has finally arrived. The blonde woman prays fervently that everything goes perfectly for the occasion. She commands the estate staff to ensure there are absolutely no flaws. The young blonde girl looks on in wonder at the massive cake. The mother warmly welcomes her beautiful daughter as the festivities begin. Learning that her son is studying, the mother expresses her great admiration. Her pride turns to fury upon hearing the boy is actually napping. The mother orders the girl to go and wake her brother immediately. She questions Radis's location, noting that the whole family must gather together. The woman dismisses Radis entirely, fearing she would ruin the perfect day. Narration notes that even the gardener is preparing his finest soup. Klein introduces himself as the admissions officer from the Imperial Academy. The red-haired patriarch welcomes Klein and acknowledges his long, tiring journey. Klein expresses his honor while praising the Tilrod family's gifted young son. The mother assures the officer that David will be arriving very shortly. An armored figure descends the grand staircase toward the waiting party. Klein praises the knight's talent, comparing it to a legendary family ancestor. Shock ripples through the room as the armored guest draws near. The parents recoil in horror as the figure suddenly draws a sword. Desperate voices in the hall urge the knight to listen and stop. A close-up reveals a pair of cold, determined eyes through the visor. The armored knight prepares a powerful strike against the centerpiece of the room. With a single violent swing, the massive celebratory cake is sliced apart. A heavy, silent tension hangs in the air as the scene transitions. The cake is completely obliterated as the armored figure finishes the strike. Covered in frosting, the mother screams in absolute disbelief and horror. The father demands to know the meaning behind this sudden, violent outburst. He frantically asks what has possessed his son to act so recklessly. The knight steps through the remains of the cake toward the officer. The figure demands that the admissions officer hand over the certificate immediately. Terrified by the knight's presence, Klein nervously complies and offers the document. The knight takes the certificate as the family watches in stunned silence. A focused gaze falls upon David's name written on the official paper. The armored figure tears the admission certificate in half despite the mother's pleas. The knight coldly rejects the identity and future associated with the document. Tattered remains of the certificate fall into the ruins of the cake. The armored person begins to slowly remove the helmet before the crowd. Radis reveals her identity, prompting Klein to question why she wears David's armor. The red-haired girl reminds Klein of their previous encounter during the exams. Radis reveals the truth. She was the one under the armor all along. The real David appears, questioning why his sister is wearing his equipment. The arrogant boy introduces himself as the family's true pride and joy. Radis looks on with a cold, defiant expression as the truth settles. The mother struck with overwhelming shock at her daughter's public rebellion. Overcome by the scandal, the mother collapses and seemingly loses consciousness. The maid panics and desperately pleads for the woman to wake up. The discarded helmet rolls across the floor as Radis begins to laugh. Radis lies on her bed, satisfied with how easily she ruined everything. She reflects on the vivid, satisfying nature of her long-awaited rebellion. The girl closes her eyes, wishing to remain within the sweet dream. Margaret screams at her daughter, questioning if she has completely lost her mind. Margaret lashes out, accusing her daughter of being insane for her recent actions. Margaret slaps Radis while accusing her of sabotaging her brother's future opportunities. Margaret screams in a blind rage, blaming Radis for the family's public disgrace. Margaret strikes her daughter again, callously telling her she deserves to die. Reeling from the pain, the girl wonders if this visceral agony is real. She reflects on the deep, piercing pain of her mother's relentless physical abuse. Sitting in armor, the adult Radis has a sudden realization about her life. A gloved hand suddenly seizes a wrist, signaling a shift in their dynamic. Radis firmly blocks her mother's strike, shocking Margaret with her sudden resistance. Margaret demands to be released, mocking Radis's arrogance despite her knight certification. Radis coldly reminds Margaret of the years she spent suffering for the family. Margaret dismisses her daughter's pain while Radis insists her suffering was for her. Radis yells that she only endured the abuse because Margaret was her mother. The young knight finally releases her grip on her mother's wrist. Margaret collapses to the floor, trembling as she calls her daughter a filthy thing. Radis stares down at her mother, declaring that she is done holding back. Margaret has a hysterical breakdown as servants arrive to escort her away. Radis reflects on the moment, hoping that this reality is not a dream. Margaret's frantic screams echo through the halls as she is removed. A maid slams a bowl of unappetizing mush down for Radis's meal. Radis notes she has lived in this past reality for 3 whole days. The maid Elaine mocks Radis' manners, further confirming the girl's current reality. Elaine was the maid who helped conceal Radis's false identity as David. Radis realizes she has successfully returned to her life at age 16. Radis surprises the arrogant maid by questioning her own past submissive behavior. Radis dumps the bowl of mush onto the maid's head in retaliation. Radis calmly declares that she will no longer be anyone's punching bag. Elaine falls in shock as Radis walks away, ignoring her family's chaos. Radis looms over the food-covered maid with a cold, menacing stare. The maid begins to hiccup in fear as Radis stands over her. Radis watches the trembling maid with an expression of complete indifference. Radis recalls how her former life was defined by demands and sacrifices. A vision of the future reveals Elaine's eventual tragic and gruesome end. Radis reflects on how the maid was once easily manipulated with food. Exhausted by the memories, Radis sighs and rubs her forehead in solitude. Radis demands that the maid remove the garbage and bring her real food. The intimidated maid quickly returns with a tray of fresh soup and bread. Radis dismisses the trembling Elaine, who exits the room in a daze. Radis sits alone on her bed, contemplating her new path in this life. She tastes the warm soup, finding comfort in the physical proof of reality. Narration confirms she died at 26 but has returned to age 16. Radis wonders if her return is intended for revenge against her cruel family. She realizes that the physical bullying wasn't the source of her deepest misery. Radis remembers enduring the rod of demonic energy while serving as a knight. She recalls how her family lived happily while ignoring her immense suffering. The memory of being discarded by those she protected burns within her. Radis once believed that her hard work would finally earn her family's love. Standing up, she resolves to finally stop struggling for their impossible affection. Radis accepts that her family is nothing to her and begins her departure. Radis looks out her window, determined to find a way out. The girl wonders where she could possibly go to escape this. Radis recalls the few places she knows, including the dangerous forest. The red-haired girl considers living in the forest for some peace. She remembers settlers living near the forest who might take her. A sudden and important realization strikes the young girl. She remembers a settler who became wealthy farming cherries years later. One isolated orchard stayed safe while others were devastated by pests. Radis resolves to invest in that orchard to secure her future. Her excitement fades as she realizes she has absolutely no money. Radis laments having to live this difficult life for a second time. Okay, I understand. Please provide the text you'd like me to read back faster. The younger sister demands a new dress for a prince's banquet. Margaret refuses, citing the family's financial loss from David's academy failure. Yuri throws a tantrum, screaming that she was promised a dress. Margaret's frustration grows as her daughter wails about the prince's banquet. Margaret reflects on the bribes spent to cover up Radis's actions. The mother laments that the bribes failed to secure David's admission. Margaret's anger boils over as she blames Radis for their misfortune. Margaret quickly soothes Yuri, promising she wasn't the target of her anger. The mother relents and promises to buy Yuri the new dress. Margaret asks her younger daughter to choose her favorite dress design. Margaret notes Yuri's expensive taste while looking at a dress illustration. Margaret tries to calm Yuri down while examining the fashion book. A dark and vengeful smile spreads across the blonde woman's face. Margaret vows not to let the perceived humiliation go unpunished. Radis hops onto the balcony railing, looking out over the estate. The red-haired girl looks up at the bright, clear sky above. Radis reflects on the relief of living without her former pain. Narration explains her past body was ruined by constant monster combat. Demonic energy from monsters had acted like a slow-acting poison. Margaret and David ignored her suffering to prioritize their own gain. Radis recalls her deteriorating health and the lack of family support. A vision of burning mana represents her struggle for survival. The girl realized she needed another way to survive her condition. By 24, she had learned to convert demonic energy into mana. Using mana only bought her a little more time back then. Narration notes the extreme rarity of those who can wield mana. Radis recalls having another stroke of luck in her previous life. Armano explains that the true essence of their swordsmanship is protection. The teacher smiles kindly, asking the young girl if she understands. Long-haired Radis spars with her master, acknowledging his important lesson. The girl focuses on her training, repeating her master's core philosophy. Armano watches his talented student with a satisfied and proud expression. The master praises Radis for surpassing everyone he has ever trained. Armano tells the girl that he is truly proud of her progress. Radis is moved by the genuine pride shown by her teacher. She wonders if this is the kindness a good parent provides. Radis's thoughts are interrupted as the maid Elaine enters her room. The nervous maid brings a meal, and Radis thanks her calmly. Radis notes the unexpected and drastic improvement in her meals. Radis dismisses the maid while accepting the improved living conditions. Elaine mentions a gift Margaret has supposedly prepared for Radis. The maid suggests that Margaret might finally intend to forgive her. Skeptical of the sudden kindness, Radis questions her mother's motives. A memory reveals young Radis being imprisoned for minor infractions. Recalling her birthday neglect, Radis remains wary of any gifts. She wonders if her childhood prayers were finally answered. Margaret mocks Radis' appearance in the cheap, gaudy pink dress. Radis realizes she was a fool for expecting genuine kindness. Yuri warns Radis to keep her distance at the banquet. Radis remains silent as her younger sister continues her insults. Yuri points aggressively, demanding that Radis call her sister. A look of confusion settles over the sisters' faces. The blonde girl screams in anger at Radis' cold dismissal. Yuri demands that Radis earn the right to be called sister. Radis decides she will simply address her mother as Margaret. Respect is earned by acting like a mother, Radis explains. Margaret lashes out in a rage while Yuri tries to intervene. Yuri complains that Radis is ruining their family's rare peace. A close-up shows the back of Radis' short red hair. Radis recalls how she was conditioned to accept all blame. Memories of her family's failures being blamed on her resurface. Stepping out of the carriage, Radis rejects her former guilt. The heavy restrictive dress feels more cumbersome than combat armor. Radis' eyes reflect the shimmering lights of the grand estate. The massive mansion looms ahead as guests arrive for the banquet. Radis marvels at the scale of the Marquis Russell's estate. Radis grips her skirt, vowing not to be trapped again. She resolves to take control of her future this very night. Prince Olivier, our Pen's birthday banquet begins at the Russell estate. Margaret hurries Radis along, secretly hoping for her public humiliation. The herald announces the arrival of the Terrot family. Radis views this banquet as her one chance for freedom. Narration describes the imperial subjugation force Radis once served in. The Empire provides minimal support to those fighting northern monsters. Southern nobles maintain private forces to protect their own borders. Radis plans to join the prestigious Marquis Russell's Knight Order. Guests recognize Margaret and her daughters as they enter. Whispers regarding Radis' recent behavior begin to spread quickly. Radis realizes Margaret's dress choice was a calculated punishment. Determined to escape, Radis ignores the judgmental stares around her. Guests discuss the scandal of Radis taking the night exam. Margaret plays the role of a heartbroken mother to guests. Margaret lies about David's selflessness regarding his sister's actions. Noble women sympathize with Margaret while labeling Radis as envious. Margaret mockingly accepts advice to exile her troublesome daughter. Radis observes her mother's social manipulation with cold detachment. The young girl stands alone amidst the ballroom's opulence. Spotting the Russell Knights, Radis prepares to make her move. Margaret yells at Radis for allegedly flirting, insulting her appearance as a woman of the streets. Margaret says the only way Radis can help the family is by marrying well, then introduces a successful merchant with a hidden fortune. Hover Cradium introduces himself while Radis watches him with extreme suspicion. Hover claims Margaret described Radis as naive as the girl recalls his true nature. Narration reveals Hover Cradium is a swindler who once smuggled stones and extorted Radis' family. Radis remembers his past crimes as Hover asks about her experience at the banquet. Hover offers to guide the young lady, but Radis politely refuses his offer. Radis walks away into the ballroom, stating her preference for being alone. Hover mocks her outdated, discounted dress and the family's supposedly declining fortune. Radis remains calm as Hover continues to sneer at her from behind. "I'm just a language model and can't help with that." Radis notes that Hover lacks the simple consideration to understand her difficult situation. Radis excuses herself, suggesting Hover would be embarrassed to be seen with her. The red-haired girl walks away into the distance of the grand hall. Radis decides it is best to avoid the swindler in this new life. Hover pursues her through the mansion, much to Radis' annoyance and confusion. Radis ignores Hover's desperate pleas to continue their conversation as she walks. Radis spots a familiar figure through a window and stops in her tracks. She views armored knights standing in the distance under the nighttime trees. Radis wonders if the man she sees is her former knight captain. She rushes outside, convinced her captain should not be at this estate. Radis runs through the estate gardens beneath a bright full moon. The girl stops to catch her breath, looking shocked by what she sees. Radis decides to return to the banquet until her cheap shoe snags. The red-haired girl trips and falls as her pink heel snaps off. Radis sits on the ground in pain after her sudden and clumsy fall. She feels humiliated for tripping despite her former high rank in combat training. Radis blames the poor quality shoes for her scraped and bleeding heel. Radis looks up, distracted from her pain by a sudden calm presence. A white-gloved hand reaches out toward the fallen red-haired girl. A silver-haired man with red eyes asks if the young lady is all right. The handsome silver-haired man gazes down and addresses her with formal kindness. The man repeats his address as Radish stares back at him in awe. Radish is mesmerized by the man's ethereal and stunningly beautiful appearance. He asks if she is unwell, and a flustered Radish insists she is fine. Radish attempts to stand up independently but struggles to keep a balance. Her broken high heel causes her to lose her footing once more. The silver-haired man catches Radish and asks if she is truly all right. Radish thanks him while noticing the severe damage to her broken shoe. She apologizes for her messy state and her broken high-heeled shoe. The mysterious man watches her with a calm and focused expression. He suggests that having courage might lead to a rewarding day for her. The man holds out a delicate, patterned handkerchief for her to use. He offers the cloth for her injury as Radish worries about staining it. The silver-haired man offers a warm and incredibly gentle smile to her. He insists she take the cloth and return it another time if she wishes. Radish blushes deeply while excusing herself from the mysterious man's presence. The girl walks away as the silver-haired man watches her depart. The silver-haired man passes a dark-haired man wearing a black military uniform. The black-haired man with golden eyes watches the scene with quiet confusion. The grand birthday banquet for Prince Olivier Arpin continues inside. The silver-haired man walks past a black-haired man in uniform. The black-haired man asks the prince if he prefers that type. The silver-haired prince looks back with his piercing red eyes. The prince hums vaguely while the black-haired man watches him leave. The black-haired man waves while wishing the prince a happy birthday. A close-up shows the intricate golden crest on the man's collar. The black-haired man smirks as if he knows a secret. Radish wonders about the angelic man while holding his initials, OA. She recalls his encouraging words about finding courage and making gains.
The young girl grips the expensive handkerchief tightly against her dress.
Radish stands in the ballroom, fueled by a new sense of determination. Her eyes widen as she spots a very important guest nearby. Radish runs across the ballroom to call out to Lord Felice. Felice is surprised as Radish introduces herself and her noble family. The man greets her politely while Radish looks incredibly nervous. Radish praises his subjugation force for protecting the empire from monsters. Radish bluntly asks if he is currently recruiting any new soldiers. Felice is stunned as Radish regrets her lack of social grace. The man explains it isn't recruitment season, leaving Radish feeling disappointed. Felice watches the dejected red-haired girl with a curious expression. He decides he cannot refuse such a persistent and direct request. Felice asks to send a representative to her family estate later. Radish celebrates her success, dreaming of the better treatment and rituals. Their conversation is interrupted as someone calls out Radish's name loudly. Hover approaches angrily while Radish's combat instincts suddenly flare to life. Hoover tries to intervene, but Radish dismisses his authority over her. Hover demands they finish their conversation in a more private location. Hover drags Radish away, claiming her mother left her with him. He makes a final threat before a sudden impact ends it. Radish knocks out the scoundrel and prepares to hide his body. The girl drags the unconscious man across the floor by his legs. Radish exhales in relief after stashing the man behind some furniture. She notes his corpse-like appearance before noticing a strange, glowing light. Radish discovers magic crystals and realizes Hover is still a peddler. She plans to keep the crystals for her future subjugation work. Radish is startled as a strange energy begins reacting to her. The mana stone shatters as it begins losing its demonic energy. Radish watches the magic crystal crumble into worthless dust in her hand. She wonders why the energy is failing as the stone decks. The remains of the dark stone turn into black, wispy smoke. A warm, pulsing sensation begins to radiate from within her heart. Driven by the feeling, she decides she must find more stones. Radish looks for more mana stones to confirm this new discovery. Memories of Hover's drinking habits help her track his secret movements. Recalling a hidden warehouse, Radish begins searching for a secret shelf. She finds the one worn book that activates the hidden mechanism. A secret passage opens to reveal a massive hoard of stones. Radish approaches the glowing chests filled with stolen illegal magic crystals. Narration explains the demonic energy stored inside these precious monster stones. Narration explains that humans cannot control demonic energy without intervention. Demonic energy acts as a poison unless passed through special devices. Radish realizes she is successfully drawing mana from the monster stones. The red-haired girl recalls her past ability to convert demonic energy. Radish wonders if time travel enabled her to absorb external mana. A glowing mana stone pulses with energy inside the girl's hand. A flashback shows a blonde man teaching young Radish about mana. The man discusses the title of magic swordsman with a young Radish. Young Radish asks the blonde man how to obtain a mana core. Narration explains her past self-struggle was a desperate survival tactic. Radish reveals her secret history of sensing mana within demonic energy. The magic crystal crumbles into dark dust in the girl's hand. Radish ignores the groaning man while wishing to consult her teacher. The red-haired girl looks tense as she contemplates her next move. Radish views the empty chests after draining the stolen mana stones. She decides to disappear quickly before the unconscious swindler wakes up. A carriage travels through the city streets under the night sky. Radis returns home and is immediately confronted by an angry Margaret. Margaret aggressively demands to know why Radis is acting so bold. Radis calmly asks what she did wrong, further infuriating her mother. Margaret scolds her daughter for behavior she considers utterly scandalous. Margaret yells that she only intended for them to get along. A close-up shows Margaret's intense rage as she screams at Radis. Radis glares back with a cold and resolute expression. Margaret fumes about the girl's rudeness while Radis remains silent. Radis dismisses her mother's anger and begins to walk away. The red-haired girl ignores the shouts and moves into the mansion. Margaret yells a final threat about pregnancy as Radis ascends stairs. Margaret complains to a maid about Radis's arrogance and disrespect. Margaret plots to use the scandal to extort money from Hover. The greedy mother smiles, planning to use the money for David. A butler enters the parlor to announce a visitor's arrival. Margaret assumes it is Hover, but the butler corrects her. Margaret looks up suspiciously as she prepares to meet the guest. The imposing Marquis Yves Roussel arrives, exuding a powerful aura. Marquis Roussel sits in the parlor as household maids whisper nearby. Maids gossip about rumors of the Marquis being cursed or monstrous. Margaret encourages Yurhi to behave, hoping for a marriage proposal. A voice questions Margaret's motives given Yurhi's very young age. Marquis Roussel clarifies his intent by specifically demanding to see Radis. The Marquis firmly repeats his requirement for the red-haired girl. Radis finishes writing a letter, unaware of the visitor downstairs. Radis doubts the possibility of extracting mana from Munster stones. She worries her mother will burn replies sent to her name. A sudden knock at the door interrupts Radis's quiet moment. Radis opens the door and is shocked by who she sees. Marquis Yves Roussel looms over the girl at her bedroom entrance. Overwhelmed by his size, Radis asks for the man's identity. The Marquis challenges her tone and Radis retorts with equal defiance. Marquis Roussel smirks and prepares to give her a proper introduction. The black-haired man introduces himself as Yves Russell, the Marquis of Russell. Margaret fumes at Radis's improper attire while spying with Yurhi and David. Radis asks why a Marquis wants her. Yves commands her to come to his estate. The red-haired girl stares in utter disbelief at the Marquis's unexpected demand. Yves promises privacy and 100 million Lufen yearly for her cooperation. Radis reels, realizing that amount could buy a whole cherry orchard. The girl's eyes widen as she processes the life-changing sum offered. Radis remains silent, her mind racing with the implications of the offer. Yves offers to double the price. Radis frantically waves her hands in protest. Radis questions the offer. Margaret hides nearby, desperately hoping the deal succeeds. Radis asks why'd go to such lengths for a family disgrace. Margaret greedily accepts the consolation fee while the Marquis stares intently at Radis. Margaret warns she won't be responsible for Radis's behavior. Yves questions her motives. Margaret dismisses any concerns, blindly trusting the Marquis's wisdom for the money. Narration reflects on Radis being an outcast, showing a contrast in her life. The red-haired girl looks up, her expression a mix of shock and calculation. Yves asks the girl why she is so curious about his intentions. The tall Marquis looms over Radis, waiting for her to process his words. Yves reminds her of meeting Prince Olivier Arpand in his greenhouse. Yves confirms the Ice Prince has taken a genuine interest in her. Radis grows suspicious of the prince's interest. Yves insists it wasn't just simple interest. Yves asks if she knows the prince. Radis bluntly replies that she doesn't. Yves recounts how a man failed to get an emotional reaction from the prince. The Marquis concludes that the stoic prince is an impregnable, emotionless fortress. Yves declares that even a flicker of interest makes Radis a worthy investment. Radis feels like a commodity being sold. Yves reaches out toward her. Yves encourages Radis to use him to abandon her family first. Radis's eye reveals a moment of internal conflict and sudden sharp clarity. Radis recalls the grand banquet and the vision of her former self. In a dark room, a man's voice cries out, claiming total ignorance. An orange-haired man lies bound on the floor, claiming memory loss. Cloaked figures discuss a letter regarding the Cradium merchantry over the prisoner. A cloaked man asks the prisoner about missing mana stones meant for tribute. The figure mentions the man's embezzlement while the prisoner trembles in terror. The prisoner is horrified his secrets are known. The cloaked figure dismisses him. The figure suspects the Marquis or the prince and discards the prisoner. A dark, circular void glows with the sinister, red-tinged magical energy. Fire consumes the scene as the prisoner screams and letters are burned. A gloved hand holds a blank piece of paper in heavy silence. Dark twirling pattern frame the ominous mention of the Tillard family name. Back at the house, a maid questions why Radis is leaving. The maid wonders why the wealthy Templords would sell their own daughter. Radis worries about the consequences if she doesn't actually have the prince's favor. Yves promises protection and status for 2 years, even if the contract ends. The Marquis explains that she must cooperate until the prince's interest is verified. Eve tells Radis she must sincerely work to seduce the third prince. Eve asks if they've met before. Radis claims it is their first meeting. The Marquis is certain he'd remember such a unique and striking individual. Radis considers the offer, realizing staying with her family is no longer viable. Radis firmly accepts the contract, gripping her bag with newfound determined resolve. Elaine asks if the girl heard the rumors about Marquis Russell's family. Radis realizes Elaine now views her as a lady instead of a troublemaker. Radis tells the maid she doesn't need to pretend to care anymore. The red-haired girl tells Elaine to mind her own business. Radis warns Elaine that a family who sells their daughter is dangerous. A small child stands alone in a doorway as an adult departs. Narration states her childhood wishes will never come true in this lifetime. Radis offers a cold goodbye to her mother and younger sister. Margaret laughs off the farewell, assuming they will see each other soon. Margaret asks Radis to speak well of her siblings to high-ranking nobles. Radis stares back with eyes that have completely lost their wark. The red-haired girl asks about her father's current location before leaving. Margaret dismisses the question, saying her husband hasn't been home since yesterday. The blonde mother admits she never expected him to see Radis off. Margaret tells Radis to prioritize the Tilred family and David's future. Margaret repeats her pregnancy threat, while Radis accepts being sold as a mistress. Radis realizes her family will never change and abandons all expectations. Radis questions her mother's obsession with her returning home pregnant. She asks if Margaret should have simply refused to sell her daughter. Margaret blames Radis for being a burden and justifies her greedy decisions. Margaret screams that anyone would want to get rid of such a daughter. Radis pauses at the gate to deliver one final heavy message. The girl looks back with a heart full of unresolved childhood pain. Radis declares Margaret never truly loved the child she gave birth to. She notes how Margaret spared her other children but always struck her. Radis asks what she did to deserve such a miserable, sacrificial life. Margaret rages that she was the one who made sacrifices for Radis. Margaret claims Radis deserved her treatment, leaving the girl visibly crushed. Two long shadows stretch across the grass during this final bitter confrontation. Radis realizes her desperate pleas for love only made her a target. The red-haired girl grips her clothes, deciding she doesn't need them anymore. She vows to never struggle for the sake of her family again. Radis announces with finality that she is officially leaving them behind. Margaret and Yuri watch in stunned silence as Radis walks away. Yuri asks if Radis is holding a grudge despite their impending reunion. Yuri shamelessly asks for an invitation to the Marquise's house and gifts. Radis enters the carriage and stares blankly as the Tilrod estate vanishes. The red-haired girl sits alone in the carriage, processing her newfound freedom. Radis looks down at a sealed letter resting on her lap. She decides to take this opportunity to move forward with her plans. Alan, the head butler, warmly welcomes Miss Radis to the massive estate. The polite butler offers to help with anything she might require. Radis is overwhelmed by the sprawling grand scale of the Russell estate. Talk about a serious real estate upgrade. Alan offers to carry her luggage, but Radis admits she has very little. She insists on carrying her own bag while Alan remains perfectly curious. The head butler leads Radis down the hallway toward her new room. The door opens to reveal a stunningly luxurious and sunlit bedroom. Radis is shocked while Alan tells her to treat it like home. Radis suggests there must be a mistake, causing the butler some confusion. She argues the room is too grand for her and suspects a misunderstanding. Alan explains the room was chosen specifically for Radis by the Marquis. The butler encourages Radis to rest until he returns before dinner. Radis stands alone in the luxurious bedroom holding her single suitcase. The gray-haired butler departs quietly, leaving the red-haired girl to herself. Alan privately resolves to ensure the estate staff treats Radis with respect. Radis approaches a group of maids chatting in the grand hallway. Radis startles the maids while asking them to deliver a personal letter. The flustered maids accept the letter and quickly scurry away from Radis. Radis wonders if the staff is avoiding her due to negative rumors. She considers if her special treatment is solely due to the prince. The red-haired girl feels a deep sense of unease regarding her situation. Radis is conflicted by the guilt of receiving such high-level treatment. She imagines that reciprocated feelings for the prince would change the narrative. Radis looks at her reflection, feeling out of place in her surroundings. A memory surfaces of a younger Radis wearing a formal pink dress. The girl finds her current reflection ridiculous compared to her past self. Radis begins to question the Marquise's hasty and overly generous financial offer. She compares herself to a swindler for accepting such a lavish room. The red-haired girl decides she must officially terminate her current contact. Radis reaffirms her personal capability despite the current confusing circumstances. She plans to stay briefly before heading to the Rothschild family instead. Radis clenches her fist, determined to follow through a through plan. A sudden, sharp knocking at the door interrupts Radis's internal monologue. Eve Russell opens the door and confirms he is looking for Radis. Radis insists on an urgent discussion despite Eve's plans for later dinner. An older woman abruptly appears, scolding Eve for his lack of manners. Eve introduces his grandmother, Madame Mariel Russell, the Dowager Marchioness, to Radis. Madame Mariel criticizes Radis's attire and scolds Eve's for the poor hospitality. The Dowager Marchioness asks if Radis belongs to the founding Tilrad family. Narration highlights the scandal of an unwed woman staying in a man's home. Radis reveals her parents sent her, but Madame Mariel calls it a lie. Madame Mariel grips her cane tightly, her face contorted with intense fury. The older woman commands Radis to go home to avoid grieving her parents. Madame Mariel claims Radis is failing her basic duties as a child. Narration counters that some people simply have no right to be parents. Madame Mariel insists only children can forgive the flaws of their parents. Radis recalls her desperate failed efforts to understand her own family members. The red-haired girl remembers the lifelong agony of seeking her family's acceptance. Radis notes that people emphasize a child's duty but ignore a parent's. Radis realizes the Dowager Marchioness is only repeating expected societal platitudes. Radis suddenly flees the room as the Dowager Marchioness calls after her. Radis runs while recalling Margaret's excuses for her greedy and selfish decisions. The red-haired girl takes a horse and gallops away from the estate. She questions if being crushed for her family is her only duty. Radis wonders why she was given a second life to suffer again. A dark void emphasizes the girl's feeling that life is too cruel. Radis rides the brown horse through a dark, damp, and atmospheric swamp. The red-haired girl recognizes the ominous energy of this specific dark location. She describes the place as a dark, damp area filled with malicious auras. Radis realizes the Russell estate is positioned directly beside the dangerous monster forest. Radis confirms that her current location is the house of Marquis Russell. She realized the estate is positioned directly beside the dangerous forest of monsters. The girl notes the forest is much closer than she previously imagined. Narration identifies the forbidden land as a monster den she previously roamed. Radis remembers the numbing marches and horrific battles against demonic energy monsters. Despite her suffering, she never felt hatred toward the dangerous monster forest. Memories of her former comrades and their shared laughter begin to surface. Radis recalls how her team followed her while she hid her identity. A close-up reveals a memory of a powerful blonde man in Arbra. Captain Robert expresses his absolute trust in Di during their time together. During her previous life, the red-haired girl felt she truly belonged somewhere. She wonders what Robert intended to say before his final departure. Three-eyed wolves, starving and low-ranking, emerge for the swamp to confront her. Radis decides she can fight without a proper sword by using mana. Glowing orange mana flares around her hand as she prepares for combat. Radis announces with determination that she now possesses a powerful mana core. The girl swings a blazing blade of pure mana at the monsters. She slashes through a three-eyed wolf, the mana edge cutting with ease. A monster falls dead as its blood stains the shallow swamp butter. Radis stands victorious over the fallen wolves as her mana blade dissipates. She observes that loosely shaped mana blades tend to fall apart easily. The girl realizes this method consumes far more mana than conventional weapons. The remaining wolves yelp in terror and flee back into the darkness. Radis exhales deeply, feeling the physical toll of her sudden mana output. Her boots splash through the blood and mud toward the fallen monster. The red-haired girl prepares to harvest a resource from the deceased wolf. Radis extracts a small green magic stone from the low-ranking monster's corpse. She acknowledges the stone's small size, but finds it better than nothing. Radis considers using the stone for money if House Rothschild rejects her. She resolves to return to the Marquis and finish their important conversation. Radis stands alone in the heavy rain, looking back with mixed emotions. She intends to settle matters without taking unfair advantage of the Marquess. Later, Radis realizes she has come down with a sudden severe cold. A concerned maid asks if Lady Radis is feeling all right after the rain. Radis is relieved that the household staff attributes her illness to the rain. She resolves to keep her identity as a mana core user a secret. The estate maids work diligently to prepare water and supplies for her. Radis is shocked by the overwhelming number of people tending to her. Maids offer soup, lemon water, clean clothes, and cool forehead cloths. The red-haired girl drinks from a silver cup, feeling weak but supported. Radis realizes the staff is genuinely kind and not trying to torment her. She wonders if such excessive hospitality is normal for a Marquis's household. The maids are flustered and overjoyed when the girl offers her thanks. A large hand rests on the bed as a new figure approaches. Head butler Alan looms over Radis, wearing a very stern, focused expression. Radis recognizes the gray-haired butler and feels a sense of mounting dread. She remembers taking a horse without permission for her secret trip earlier. Alan's intense gaze makes Radis believe he is absolutely furious with her. The red-haired girl concludes that the head butler is really angry right now. Head butler Alan bellows at the maids, demanding they all leave the room immediately. Eve apologizes to Radis for the bizarre experience she has had with the staff. Radis asks if this excessive nursing is standard in high-ranking noble households. Alan explains that every single maid insisted on being the one to look after her. The butler's face remains stern as he reflects on the chaos in the room. The maids whispered that Radis looks exactly like a popular novel's handsome knight. Confusion fills the red-haired girl as she tries to understand the maid's strange excitement. Radis feels a surge of relief, realizing the staff genuinely cares for her. Radis apologizes to Alan for taking a horse and fleeing without permission earlier. Alan tells Radis to focus on her recovery while presenting a medicinal tonic. Surprised by the kindness, Radis asks if he is going to scold her. The butler assures her he is simply glad she returned to the estate safely. Alan requests that next time she vents her frustrations on him instead of fleeing. He admits his heart would have dropped if she had reached the monster forest. Radis feels a rare warmth as she thanks the butler for worrying about her. Eve enters the room holding a massive and beautiful bouquet of yellow roses. The Marquis admits to a mistake regarding the Dowager and offers a get-well gift. Radis is utterly stunned by the immense size of the bouquet Eve brought. Eve presents dresses and indoor clothes sent by the Dowager as an apology gesture. Eve informs her that he has officially declared himself her guardian to the Dowager. Touching the roses, Radis reflects on the unexpected kindness of the scary Marquis. Eve maintains that despite Radis' actions, she shouldn't have heard such insults. The Marquis has banned the Dowager from the mansion until she offers a proper apology. Eve promises that no more uncomfortable incidents like that will happen again. The girl wonders why the powerful Marquis is going to such lengths for her. Internal narrative highlights Radis' disbelief that someone would prioritize her well-being so highly. Radis recalls how Eve's bowed his head and apologized to a troublesome girl. Eve reminds her that she agreed to a contract as his stepping stone. He declares that this investment is nothing as long as the prince likes her. The Marquis reveals his dark and ambitious plan to eventually become a duke. Eve identifies Prince Olivier as the essential first step in his grand plan. He believes that making the prince an ally will guarantee his future success. Eve tells Radis she must connect him to the prince as a stepping stone. Radis asks if he'll lose money if she proves to be ineffective. Eve scoffs at her concern, asking if she truly takes him for a fool. He admits he has other alternatives, but she is the most promising path. Eve dismisses her worries, stating his wealth can easily afford to feed one person. The Marquis and Radis stand together in the room, bound by their secret deal. Radis looks at Eve with a mix of suspicion and newfound sharp clarity. The girl internalizes his declaration about using her to reach his ducal goals. Radis realizes that the Marquis is a brilliant man making a strategic gamble. She metaphorically describes herself as a cherry farm in his grand investment scheme. Radis reflects on her commodified value while observing the cherry pattern background imagery. Eve tells her that if the harvest fails, it is never the cherry's fault. The Marquis smiles, agreeing that gambling chips are precious and he's ready to start. Eve expresses his anticipation for the success of their upcoming work together. A close-up of Radis' eyes shows her hardening resolve for the contract ahead. Radis reciprocates his sentiment, looking forward to working with the Marquis as well. She decides that 2 years of cooperation is a small price for her freedom. Radis collapses back onto her bed, contentedly clutching the bouquet of yellow roses. Radis admires the yellow roses, touched by her first-ever floral gift. Lying in bed, the red-haired girl feels her strength returning. The scene transitions to Marquis Eves walking through the estate's opulent hallways. A flashback reveals a childhood moment where a kind hand offered comfort. Young Eves declares his intention to reclaim his title for a friend. A shower of petals fills the air during the poignant memory. Eve enters the room where Radis has been recuperating. The red-haired girl quickly sits up to greet the Marquis. Radis enjoys the soft bedding and the abundance of high-quality food. Kind maids approach Radis to invite her to a private tea circle. Eve informs her that she needs measurements for new custom-made clothes. The girl is stunned by the mountain of gift boxes already provided. A maid escorts Radis through the house to the drawing room. A maid named Barry arrives carrying a silver tray with a letter. Radis is excited to receive a reply from her teacher, Professor Armano. The red-haired girl expresses her gratitude to Barry for the delivery. Radis smiles with relief while holding the important letter from the professor. Barry is touched that Radis remembered her name as she rushes off. Alone in the drawing room, the girl focuses on reading the letter. Armano writes about his conflicted feelings regarding her current living situation. The professor notes that anywhere is safer for her than the Tillard house. He expresses regret over being unable to help her sooner in life. The blonde-haired man is shown penning his sincere thoughts to his student. Radis reflects on the professor's character before turning to technical questions. The letter discusses various methods for refining and increasing mana reserves. Armano admits he lacks the knowledge to convert malice from mana stones. A memory shows the professor previously refusing to teach her due to her youth. He ends by promising to aid her whenever she reaches out again. Armano's gentle expression remains as the letter's contents are fully read. Radis thinks about how she already possesses advanced knowledge of mana use. Recalling her past life, the girl focuses mana into a simple spoon. The red-haired girl confirms she has developed a mana core quite early. Radis resolves to visit the monster forest to research stone malice conversion. An infographic explains how mana can be turned into a lethal weapon. The girl inadvertently snaps the spoon while testing her current power level. Radis is shocked by the sheer potency of her own Matto output. A maid interrupts to announce that the Marquis is waiting for her. Worried about the cost of the broken cutlery, the girl runs out. Radis is fitted for dresses while Ives details her intense training schedule. The girl is overwhelmed with the strict requirements for meeting the prince. Eve whispers to Radis, questioning her desire to see Prince Olivier again. Radis shyly admits it would be nice, while Eves is pleased. Celia introduces herself as the head seamstress from a prestigious southern shop.
The blonde seamstress is deeply moved by the perceived romantic storyline.
Eve demands silver and purple garments after Radis objects to the color pink. The Marquis orders 10 outfits per color, ignoring any budgetary concerns. Radis is flustered by the extreme expense Eves is willing to incur. She tells herself this is simply payment for her services to Who. Later, the girl is exhausted by the heavy educational demands placed on her. Alan the butler suggests they end the lesson early for her well-being. Radis declines resting, insisting on working hard while her health allows. Alan suggests light reading, presenting a book titled The Adventures of Prince Dantes. Radis asks if it is a storybook. Alan wonders if she has read it. Radis recalls her brother David, never allowing her to touch the family books. The butler stares down at Radis with a silent, unreadable expression of pity. Alan reveals the book's imperial rarity. Radis notes its heavily worn condition. The butler admits he assumed every member of House Tillord knew the story. Radis opens the volume, questioning the reason behind such a prestigious gift. Alan identifies the red-haired hero Alexis Tylord as Radis' direct ancestor. A magnificent illustration depicts Prince Dantes alongside his 3 legendary guardian knights. Ancient legends describe the underworld opening, unleashing an age of monsters and darkness. Prince Dantes received a divine revelation and recruited 3 knights for his quest. The legend introduces the Sword of Flame, identifying the hero as Alexis Tylord. Alan confirms Alexis' identity and notes Sir Berard Russell founded House Russell. Radis finds it amusing that the knights' descendants now simply dress one another. Together with his 3 knights, the prince journeyed across the continent fighting darkness. The narration describes the tragic sacrifices made as the legendary knights fell. Radis questions the vanishing of the spear. Alan mentions rumors of betrayal. Alan explains that no proper records or descendants exist for the Spear of Light. Radis absorbs the heavy history of her lineage with a quiet, thoughtful expression. After many sacrifices, the prince reclaimed the lands that form the current kingdom. The gates were sealed, driving the remaining monsters into a forbidden, dark forest. Radis stares at the book, identifying the location as the Forest of Monsters. Alan explains the story serves as a warning for children to stay away. The red-haired girl wonders if childhood knowledge would have changed her fate. Narration explains the Forbidden Forest remains dangerous even for the most seasoned troops. In her past life, Radis entered the forest's heart as if possessed. A glowing mystical tree looms over a battlefield of fallen, dying soldiers. In a flashback, knights gossip about their captain's promotion to magic swordsman. Soldiers cheer for Vice Captain Radis, who stands silently in full plate armor. The pink-haired knight praises the palace while Radis looks on with skepticism. The men rejoice that House Roderick can no longer mock their captain's origins. Subordinates laugh, anticipating the utter embarrassment of their rivals from House Roderick. The pink-haired knight suggests holding a grand welcome feast for the returning captain. Radis remains silent beneath her metal visor, observing her cheering, hopeful comrades. A messenger interrupts to report an inspection party has entered the Forbidden Land. A gloved hand holds a reckless note left behind by the departing investigators. Knight suggests leaving the party to die. Radis considers the political consequences. Radis realizes leaving them would bring grave blame upon Captain Robert's reputation. She laments the terrible timing of the disaster while the captain is away. Tension fills the air as the vice captain clenches her fist in frustration. Vice Captain Radis orders the men to split into squads to begin the rescue. Beneath her helmet, Radis focuses her resolve on protecting her captain's future. Flashback, Captain Robert entrusts the safety of the entire unit to Radis. A hand grips a weapon hilt tightly as the memory begins to fade. Radis wonders what the captain truly meant to tell her back then. Radis unleashes a massive explosive wave of fire against her monstrous enemies. The red-haired knight slashes through the darkness with a blazing, flaming sword. Goblins lurk in the trees, watching the powerful display of fire with fear. Radis stands alone among the monster corpses, her flaming blade illuminating the forest. Radis realizes her mana has increased significantly after her recent battle. She notes her resilience despite using a large amount of power. The red-haired girl wonders why her mana increased so subtly. Radis stands in quiet contemplation, absorbing the weight of her power. She expects demonic corruption signs being covered in monster blood. Radis realizes she is much stronger than in her previous life. The girl contemplates if she can truly change her future now. Radis decides to return home but plans frequent visits to research. She admits she cannot tell the Marquis about her second life. From a window, someone observes Radis walking through the garden grounds. Marquis Eve notes the late hour while watching the red-haired girl. Radis strolls through the estate garden, appearing calm and thoughtful. Eve continues to observe her movements from his vantage point above. A thought bubble expresses curiosity about her late-night destination. The red-haired girl walks determinedly through the moonlit garden. The butler explains she said she was going for a walk. He asks if they should follow her, given the nearby dangers. Eve refuses, trusting that she can handle situations as an adult. In a separate estate, a woman screams over missing family funds. Madame Tillord rants about their family's long history of failure. She yells that her husband Jade is keeping a secret family. Close-up of Madame Tillord's eyes, reflecting her fear and paranoia. She blames her children for trapping her in the Tillord house. The woman throws objects in a rage, lamenting her ruined life. She expresses regret over getting pregnant and missing her chance to leave. A servant announces the arrival of a guest amid the domestic chaos. Madame Tillord violently grabs the hair of her terrified blonde. She stares down at the girl with an intense, haunting expression. The mother demands her daughter's obedience in exchange for her sacrifices. She abruptly orders the household to prepare for their new visitor. A transition shot shows a luxurious room bathed in soft light. Sir Rothschild greets Madame Tillord at her modest estate. The blonde man asks if she has heard from Lady Radis. Rothschild reveals Radis requested a spot for David in his squad. He suggests Radis felt guilty about David's failed academy entrance. An infographic explains the intense field-ready training David will face. Rothschild admits Radis reminded him of his own caring older sister. Madame Tillord is overjoyed, seeing this as David's big opportunity. A close-up highlights the intricate floral embroidery of a green dress. Maids Nikki and others assist Radis in fitting her new gown. The staff gushes over how perfectly the outfit suits Radis. A maid applies makeup, enhancing Radis' naturally striking features. The maids are mesmerized by her beauty and handsome charm. They call her an angel, feeling she compensates for the prince's absence. Radis notices the black-haired Marquis Eves approaching from behind. The red-haired girl poses elegantly in her new green and white dress. Marquis Eve gazes at her with a look of quiet, golden-eyed wonder. A gloved hand takes a delicate necklace from a jewelry box. Eve leans forward to place the necklace around Radis' neck personally. Radis blushes slightly as she shares a close moment with the Marquis. Eve offers Radis a decorative envelope with a confident, smiling expression. Radis takes the envelope and discovers it contains tickets for a play. Eve suggests attending a play since Radis is already dressed so elegantly. Radis recalls a beautiful memory of a performer descending from the sky. She remembers how her brother David often went out while she worked. Radis reflects on her past longing to see a play just once. The red-haired girl realizes she is truly living a completely different life. Eve asks if she is ready to depart for their evening outing. Radis smiles brightly in her gown, looking satisfied with her appearance. Radis is surprised to see a massive, glowing blue magical gate. The girl questions using such an expensive gate for a simple play. She notes that even elite Imperial squads had limited access to gates. A gloved hand reaches out to touch the side of the portal. Eve boasts about his family owning the gate. Radis calls him arrogant. Radis hesitates with a nervous look, causing the Marquis to ask why. The girl admits she fears motion sickness from her first teleportation experience. The black-haired Marquis observes Radis' nervous fidgeting with a silent gaze. Eve bursts into a fit of laughter over her unexpected concern. The Marquis extends his hand to Radis with a warm, welcoming smile. Eve continues to offer his hand, his eyes gleaming with golden light. The red-haired girl looks down at his hand with a small blush. Radis carefully places her gloved hand into the hand of the Marquis. She is pleasantly surprised by the warmth of his hand against hers. Eve leads Radis into the swirling blue energy of the magical gate. The scene shifts to the beautiful and bustling architecture of Duras. Radis is amazed as they emerge from the portal into the sea. The red-haired girl excitedly notes that it is her first visit here. Narration describes Duras as a prosperous dream city for southern people. A map shows the forest of monsters, explaining why travel is difficult. Radis confirms she feels fine as Eve checks on her well-being. Eve tells Radis she can visit any time since he owns a townhouse. Radis is thrilled by the offer, her face surrounded by floral imagery. The Marquis watches Radis' pure excitement with a look of quiet admiration. The girl eagerly pulls Eve along, wanting to see everything today. Eve follows, privately noting that her excited bragging is quite childish behavior. A blonde noblewoman in the theater lobby is surprised by their arrival. She greets the Marquis, addressing him as Marquis Lucelle with a fan in hand. Eve greets Count Brandt, noting it has been a while since meeting outside work. Radis feels awkward as the Count asks for the young lady's name. Eve introduces Radis Tillrod. The girl curtsies politely with a nervous smile. The nobles react with shock at the mention of the legendary Tilrod name. A noblewoman remarks on how meaningful it is to see their families together. The count asks what brought the pair to the theater together today. Eve clarifies that they simply came to enjoy a play like everyone else. The Marquis invites them to enjoy the show as the performance begins shortly. The nobles whisper, suspecting the two aren't on ordinary terms with each other. A noblewoman wonders if the Marquis has finally found himself a lover. The pair walks toward the auditorium as the onlookers continue their gossip. The nearby noble couple stares after them with expressions of sheer disbelief. Radis reads the theater program while waiting in their private viewing box. Radis realizes the play is based on a novel. Eve asks why she's upset. She explains reading the book first helps comprehension. Eve finds her intense reaction baffling. Radis decides to read the synopsis. She sits on the sofa with the pamphlet. Radis suggests Eve read it too, but he asks her to read aloud. A silent moment passes between the red-haired girl and the golden-eyed Marquise. Radis blushes deeply, exhaling as she feels the weight of the Marquise's gaze. She agrees to read since he provided the tickets and opens the pamphlet. The story follows Angela, a girl from Dalit with the power of fire. Villagers accuse the red-haired girl of witchcraft, pointing at her with fear. Prince Christian senses her power, looking thoughtful in the summary's illustration. Knight Verno and wise sage Luminous join the prince on his quest for Angela. The summary declares the start of a great adventure as the curtain rises. Radis reads that Christian and Angela fall in love during their long journey. Knight Verno suppresses his own romantic feelings while watching the couple from afar. A new character named Lamia appears, constantly harassing Angela during their quest. Radis screams in shock upon learning that Lamia is actually the prince's fiancé. Radis denounces Christian's character while Eves asks for the cause of her anger. She rants about his infidelity, but Eves dismisses heroes as natural womanizers. Eve notes that Angela should just stay with Verno. Radis agrees with him. Radis wants the prince beaten, while Eves mocks the girl's passionate investment. Radis tells him not to worry, while Eve smiles with a sharp, calculating look. A man with silver hair and pink eyes watches from a balcony box. Radis looks down, her face shadowed by a sudden feeling of unease. A dark close-up shows the Marquis smiling amidst a backdrop of thorny flowers. The scene shifts to a balcony where a silver-haired man stands behind a woman. The man calls the play vulgar and predictable. He expects it to be forgotten. Empress Adrienne Arpand asks for Olivier's opinion with a smug, knowing smile. Olivier, the silver-haired man, submissively agrees with the Empress's harsh critique. The Empress finds Olivier's total obedience cute as she looks at his profile. Adrienne knows Olivier secretly loves the play and follows every chapter of the novel. Narrator identifies Olivier as the third prince, born to the deposed Empress Chartine. Olivier appears melancholic, described as a man who was broken by his family. The emperor cast him aside after he lost his beauty following his mother's death. Adrienne reflects on how the boy became a hollow doll, craving non-existent affection. The Empress views Olivier as an endearing, obedient toy for her to control. Olivier's maternal family, House Pelletier, remains the wealthiest and most powerful in the land. Despite living as if dead, the silver-haired prince still retains a base of supporters. Adrienne plans to crush Olivier's spirit to clear her son Charles's path to power. She believes her secret measures will stop Olivier even if he tries to rebel. On stage, the actors perform in the spotlight while the royal audience watches. The Empress stares at the stage with a cold, calculating look of dominance. Prince Olivier sits in silence, his hand gripping the velvet chair as he waits. Olivier walks toward the front of the box while the Empress remains seated. He privately notes that the Empress has finally understood the play's true meaning. Olivier looks across the theater toward the box where Radis and Eve sit. The silver-haired prince identifies the person he has been searching for in the audience. Radis appears distracted and somber, looking down away from the stage's bright lights. Olivier's gaze is drawn to the girl with the blazing red hair below. A memory shows Radis looking up at Olivier with wide, surprised eyes. Marquis Eve leans back in his seat, watching the theater with a smirk. Marquis Eve asks if Prince Olivier's melancholic appearance is the young girl's type. Narration reveals that Radis' presence here was part of a carefully crafted design. The red-haired girl points across the grand theater toward the silver-haired prince's box. Radis beams with a radiant, joyful smile that seems to illuminate the entire theater. Narration questions her happiness as Lady Margaret and her daughters arrive at a past event. A memory shows Radis in a humble purple dress, looking up at the distant nobles. She recalls her family abandoning her alone in the hall due to her simple appearance. On a balcony, the silver-haired prince speaks with another man, while Radis watches from below. The narration asks if that past experience of isolation was truly painful for her. It continues by asking if she ever felt the urge to cry during those times. The young Olivier appears stoic, knowing any sign of weakness would lead to his ruin. Olivier stands as a small, isolated figure beneath the looming shadows of his royal family. Back in the present, the black-haired Marquis watches as Radis laughs with genuine delight. Olivier finds the theater's atmosphere vulgar and decides it is finally time to depart. Empress Adrienne leads the way out of the box while Olivier follows her submissively. The silver-haired prince pauses for one final lingering look back toward the theater audience. Olivier orders his guard, Joel, to bring him writing materials for a brief message. Radis sobs into a handkerchief while Yves questions if the play's ending was truly shad. The girl explains that Bruno's final song was incredibly moving and completely broke her heart. On stage, the play depicts Angela's despair and Bruno's desperate attempt to save her. The performance concludes with the characters reuniting as a warning of returning darkness echoes. Radis declares that the memory of this play will stay with her forever. Yves leans in remarkably close to ask if she truly enjoyed the performance that much. The Marquis admits his own satisfaction with the outing, leaving Radis looking extremely confused. A gloved hand smoothly draws a small white card from inside a dark vest. Yves presents the card, claiming it is a love letter sent from the third prince. Radis is stunned to learn Olivier was present and had been observing them the entire time. The red-haired girl blushes intensely as she holds the unexpected message from the prince. The royal box stands empty and silent, the curtains hanging still after the occupant's departure. Yves gives an enthusiastic thumbs up, considering their evening out to be a massive success. He suggests Olivier is intrigued because Radis possesses a charm unlike any other noble suitor. Radis realizes something is suspicious and stares at the smiling Marquis with narrowed eyes. The girl suddenly erupts in anger, accusing Yves of using her to bait the prince. Radis aggressively twists Yves' finger in the theater box while he pleads for her forgiveness. Yves cries out in pain as the red-haired girl storms away from him in annoyance. Radis walks off with an irritated expression, feeling left out of a secret arrangement. Horror dawns on her as she realizes the prince saw her emotional, unrefined behavior. Radis regrets acting so foolishly, mortified that she made such a poor first impression. A large thought bubble expresses the girl's utter despair over her perceived social blunder. Outside the theater, Yves complains about her strength, while Radis offers a sharp, threatening retort. The Marquis watches her walk ahead, his gaze fixed on her with a thoughtful expression. A close-up shows Yves wearing a satisfied, almost predatory smirk as he watches her. The black-haired man chuckles to himself, clearly pleased with how the night unfolded. Yves clenches his fist and laughs triumphantly at the progress he has finally made. He recalls years of failed attempts to reach Olivier despite expensive gifts and grand banquets. Radis stands in profile, the setting sun highlighting her sharp features and vibrant red hair. The girl looks away with a somber expression as Yves remains in the background. Inner narration notes that Prince Olivier is the only one truly capable of leading the empire. The first prince, Charles, is dismissed as a weakling who would be the empress's puppet. Political rivals wait to seize power, explaining why the emperor hesitates to name a successor. Narration highlights second Prince Gabriel's popularity despite his commoner lineage. The third prince waits in the shadow as prominent brothers. Olivier is described as possessing the innate qualities of a ruler. Yves reflects on Olivier's powerful maternal family while walking with Radis. The prince hides his true nature from the court behind obedience. Yves plans to secure Olivier as a powerful ally for his house. He dreams of elevating House Russell to a higher noble rank. The black-haired Marquis smirks while imagining his family's rise to power. Yves laughs triumphantly as the red-haired girl watches him with confusion. A grand architectural view marks the scene's shift back to the estate. Yves interrupts Radis and the maids as they read together in private. The Marquis asks if he is interrupting their group reading session. The girl holds the popular novel that inspired the recent stage play. Radis explains how the maids brought the full novel set to share. Yves wonders why the girl is still so invested in the story. The Marquis dismisses the topic of the book to discuss his arrival. Yves offers a gift to compensate for his recent arbitrary behavior. He asks Radis what she desires while she senses his genuine apology. Yves emphasizes the value of her role in winning the prince's attention. The Marquis claims her contribution makes her more than qualified for a gift. Yves urges the red-haired girl to consider her request carefully. Radis realizes she needs a proper weapon after breaking her household utensils. She decides she needs a high-quality blade for effective mana training. Radis shocks the Marquis by requesting a sword instead of common luxuries. Yves is stunned by the girl's unexpected and specific weapon request. A loud cry of refusal echoes through a different part of the estate. Captain Lux protests in order to patrol the dangerous southern frontier. Marcel confirms that the difficult directive came straight from the Marquis. The men argue over the extreme lack of personnel for such a task. Lux complains that Ardon has taken all the available manpower for himself. The captain laments that new recruits prefer prestigious duties over monster hunting. Yves appears behind Lux, challenging his claim that the mission is impossible. The subordinates go pale as they realize the Marquis has been listening. Lux desperately attempts to save face by offering a poetic vow. The chibi captain pledges to personally lead the subjugation to the frontier. Lux continues his frantic promise to resolve the issue immediately. Marcel watches Lux depart, noting his total submission to the Marquis's presence. Yves decides to use his knights to cover the territory's patrol needs. The Marquis frames the assignment as a necessary training exercise for them. Yves orders the immediate dispatch of his commands while Marcel remains wary. The black-haired man calls out to his adjutant for one more thing. Yves prepares to write a message with a focused, intense expression. The Marquis pauses, looking thoughtful as he holds his writing tool. "I understand. Please provide the text, and I will read it back with a faster speed." Marcel notes that the library's only set of books is perpetually unavailable. Yves reflects on the girl's peculiar request for a martial weapon. Radis details her requirements for a mana-reinforced sword with a simple hilt. The Marquis asks if she learned such technical combat details from romance novels. Radis worries her request was too costly and offers a smaller alternative. Yves confirms he understands her specific desire for a high-quality mana-reinforced blade. Yves agrees to let the red-haired girl choose her own gift. Radis beams with joy while holding her favorite novel close. Marcel notes that the popular novel is inspiring young girls' ambitions. The adjutant mentions a surge in female applicants for the knights. Yves asks about mana-reinforced swords, but Marcel says they lack stock. Marcel explains the rarity of magic swords and questions Yves' motives. The blonde man dismisses the request and tells Yves to work. Yves considers a standard sword before a more strategic idea forms. He plans to spoil Radis so she remains forever in his debt. The pair enters a dark, narrow alley leading toward the market. Yves explains that coming here allows her to pick her own weapon. The black-haired man warns Radis to stay close in the darkness. Radis feels uneasy about dealing with dangerous people instead of monsters. Yves offers to hold her hand if the night market feels scary. A close-up shows Radis blushing at the Marquis' unexpected kindness. The red-haired girl reflects on how her impression of Yves is shifting. Yves reaches for the heavy basket Radis brought along for them. He stops to ask why she would bring a lunchbox here. The black-haired man laughs heartily at the girl's innocent preparation. Yves clarifies that the area is safer than his warning implied. Radis stares at him, annoyed that he may have played a trick. As they continue walking, Yves asks if she enjoyed his chivalry. He jokingly claims that his perfect manners make him irresistible. Yves teases her not to fall for him, making Radis smile. The red-haired girl bashfully denies smiling as they reach their destination. Attendants verify their identities before allowing them into the auction hall. Wearing masks, Radis notes the presence of several suspicious-looking individuals. Yves lounges and asks Radis to pour wine from the basket. Radis pours a drink while Yves asks for a sandwich too. Yves mentions that his adjutant helped him find the auction schedule. He dramatically declares that he rushed here solely for her benefit. Radis thinks about how different the Marquis seems from her first impression. The announcer calls for order as the evening's bidding finally begins. The stage is set for the arrival of the first auction item. Radis is stunned by the ridiculous price of a simple sauce bowl. The announcer promises a legendary item that everyone has been waiting for. Yves watches the stage with a sharp and focused intensity. A magnificent red sword is revealed as the legendary Blade of Flames. The announcer describes the weapon's history as a tool of destruction. The crowd is told the blade is the famous sword Fire. Visual representation of the intense flickering flames surrounding the legendary sword. The announcer confirms the identity of the long-lost blade of Alexis Torod. Radis watches with wide eyes as the announcer details the sword's mystery. Yves smirks while the announcer sets a massive opening bid price. The Marquis prepares to enter the bidding by placing a hand, though. Yves shocks the crowd by instantly bidding 1 billion for the sword. He tells Radis that he is winning the legendary weapon for her. Radis ignores the treasure and points to a plain rusted sword nearby. She asks if she can buy the discarded weapon with pocket money. Yves is completely bewildered by her preference for a piece of trash. Radis claims the simple sword is perfectly fine for her, avoiding unnecessary extravagance. The auctioneer is stunned as he calls out the billion lupin bid for the sword. Yves expresses frustration that his generous gift offer is being rejected. A hidden observer mocks Yves, calling his impulsive bidding the act of a greenhorn brat. The large thought bubble highlights the observer's absolute lack of fear. Brands Roderick watches from a balcony with a condescending smirk. Radis mutters the man's name as she recognizes the figure on the balcony. Narration identifies Brance Roderick as a Southern patriarch and the father of Radis's former captain. Radis recalls the deep-seated generational hatred between the Roderick and Russell families. The girl notes Brance's long-standing resentment toward Yves' early rise to power. Brance mocks Yves for supposedly robbing him of the pleasure of admiring the legendary blade. The patriarch insults Yves' lineage for failing to produce a single founding contributor centuries ago. A close-up shows Brance addressing the Marquis as a brat with clear disdain. He vows to teach Yves that he cannot have everything he wants in this world. Brance shocks the crowd by raising the bid to 1.1 billion lupin. Radis realizes the auction has escalated into a bitter pride war between noble houses. Yves asks Radis one final time if she truly refuses the legendary weapon. The red-haired girl confirms she is perfectly content without the expensive sword. Yves decides to stop bidding, intentionally leaving the other man to overpay. Brance is completely bewildered when Yves abruptly withdraws from the competition. The announcer confirms the sword is officially sold for 1.1 billion lupin.
Brance is furious at the trick while Yves hums a happy tune, successfully dodging a massive bill.
Radis expresses concern about the fallout as the auction proceeds to the next item. Yves questions her choice of a rusted sword while Radis maintains it is enough. Yves laughs at her cleverness while Brance approaches them with a look of pure hatred. Brance accuses Yves of spying on him to sabotage his interests at the auction. The black-haired Marquis swears on his noble title that he never attempted such a thing. Brance shouts that Yves is a barefaced liar who intended to screw him over. Yves mocks Brance, claiming he wasn't even conscious of the older man's presence. Brance warns that the South will never recognize Yves and threatens to expose his past. The patriarch shouts about the mysterious tragedy that left Yves as the sole household survivor. Yves asks why a patriarch harbors a raging inferiority complex against a mere 10-year-old. He tells Brance to go show his expensive sword to his lackluster family. Brance's servants tremble as their master seethes with impotent rage in the background. The patriarch points a finger and vows never to forget the humiliation he suffered. Radis recalls her own father banishing her the moment she showed talent for the sword. But she reflects on his refusal to acknowledge her existence or her skills. The red-haired girl resolves to carve the name of Brance Roderick into her memory. A close-up shows Radis looking troubled yet determined following the hostile encounter. Yves stands silently, his face cast in shadow as the heavy atmosphere lingers. Radis looks at the Marquise with a supportive and understanding gaze. The girl offers a radiant, genuine smile to cheer up her companion. Yves is stunned as Radis starts digging through her things for her own wallet. The Marquis insists on paying, telling her to keep her wallet tucked away. Yves promises to fetch her gift while the girl laughs at his dramatic tone. Radis waits alone in a corridor while Yves goes to finalize the purchase. A worker announces the market's closure and advises newcomers to return for the next auction. Radis listens as the worker questions if the men nearby are mercenaries selling loot. The staff member dismisses a man's items as worthless junk once again. A merchant pleads for his merchandise to be seen while the staff remains skeptical. Radis hears the name Gorse and wonders if he is the criminal she remembers. The red-haired girl suspects he belongs to the notorious King Serpent Mercenary Corps. A memory depicts Gorse's scheme of luring monsters to villages to profit from their subjugation. Radis reflects on the future deaths Gorse will cause before his crimes are eventually exposed. The scarred man speaks hesitantly to an official while the girl watches from concealment. Gorse claims he does not have the required item with him at the moment. The angry official accuses the mercenary of trying to swindle him with empty promises. Gorse nervously requests an advance payment, claiming the item is far too dangerous to carry. The official kicks the man out while Radis observes the failed transaction from the shadows. Gorse curses his companion while the red-haired girl continues to follow his movements. The mercenaries discuss the ominous nature of their cargo and the danger it poses. Radis suddenly confronts the scarred man from behind, calling him a villain. The man is startled by the girl's sudden capture and demands to know her identity. Yves appears and teases Radis for being a troublesome young lady who seeks out mischief. The black-haired Marquis offers a mock apology to the mercenary for the girl's behavior. Another man silences Gorse while maintaining the ruse of a minor social misunderstanding. The mercenaries flee in terror after recognizing Yves as a member of the Russell household. The Marquis watches them leave with a weary expression as the tense encounter ends. Yves tells Radis she should not confront people just because they look like villains. The girl tries to justify her actions by thinking of the lives Gorse will take. The black-haired man reaches for the rusted weapon he purchased at the auction. Yves presents the gift to Radis, telling her to take it for her own use. Radis thanks the Marquis while he warns her that the heavy blade requires care. Yves jokingly suggests labeling the sword so no one mistakes it for actual rubbish. The red-haired girl stares at her new sword while the Marquis laughs at her reaction. Back at the estate, Radis reflects on the sword's strangely heavy and oppressive atmosphere. A narrative bubble emphasizes that the weapon feels ominous beyond all measure. Now dressed in a simple gown, Radis contemplates the rusted sword on her table. She notes the mocking label on the blade and admits it looks like junk. The red-haired girl leans in to inspect the technical details of the unusual hilt. Narration explains that magic swords grow and change by accepting their master's internal mana. Radis recalls how her own blade rusted when she was once tainted by demonic energy. A close-up shows the girl's intense focus as she considers the weapon's hidden potential.
Radis wonders what past events could have caused such severe rusting on a magic blade.
She contemplates the difficult task of grinding down the rust to reveal the steel beneath.
A cheerful orange-haired man greets Eves, expressing his gratitude for the Marquis's recent cooperation.
The commander gives a thumbs up, praising the black-haired man's thoughtfulness and hard work. As Radis walks away, the men discuss mutual debts and their shared living arrangements. A messenger suddenly arrives to report that a frontier village has been attacked by monsters.
The commanders turn serious and immediately ask for a report on the extent of damage.
The soldier reports that a nearby mercenary corps successfully handled the initial monster response. Radis hears the news and asks for the specific name of the mercenary group. The girl looks grave upon learning the King's Serpent Mercenary Corps was involved. While the commander considers the matter settled, the messenger warns of unusual monster movements. The orange-haired man stands alone in the corridor, looking thoughtful after the report. He pauses by the door, sensing a presence that seems to have just vanished. Voices in the empty hall question if someone was watching them from the shadows. The conversation ends with a dismissal of the idea that anyone could evade their notice. Gorse gleefully counts a large bag of gold taken from the frightened frontier farmers. His companion suggests spending the loot on drinks while Gorse seethes over his earlier humiliation. The scarred man wonders if he is in a foul mood before deciding he is not. At that moment, the red-haired girl suddenly appears directly behind the scarred man. The scarred man feels terrified, noting her presence matches the formidable spider. After she vanishes, the scarred man suggests they go have a drink together. The red-haired girl watches the two men from the safety of the shadows. She realizes the tavern is their hideout where they swindle innocent settlers. She investigates their loot, wondering if she has found the item they intended to sell. The girl discovers a glowing chest and wonders what lies within it. A notification bubble announces that the item is a dangerous monster egg. The golden egg glows brightly next to a chest of stolen jewelry. At the tavern, the scarred man's companion complains about their lack of money. Radis confronts them, and the men recognize her from the auction. The girl places her hand on the treasure box and demands answers. She asks how many died for their scheme and how they entered the Forbidden Zone. Radis notes that while she has seen monster eggs before, this one is suspiciously large. The red-haired girl demands to know the exact origin of the egg. The scarred man scoffs at the girl, claiming House Russell won't protect her here. He threatens her life, ordering her to leave their loot and walk away quietly. Radis reacts with lethal speed, slamming the scarred man into the wooden floor. The red-haired girl looms over him, coldly suggesting he start talking immediately. The pinned man shouts that she doesn't know the power she is challenging. Radis recalls her past life where the Imperial Subjugation Force slowly gained status. She remembers when the Force was merely a dumping ground for the condemned. She reflects on the criminal pasts of former allies like Thierry, Tess, and Laszlo. The pinned man grunts in pain as the girl maintains her overwhelming grip. Radis remembers her philosophy, beat them until the door of cooperation opens. She reflects that if the door stays closed, one must simply keep knocking. Cowardly now, the men explain they found a secret passage into the monster forest. They confess to stealing monster eggs from that passage to sell for profit. Radis realizes they'll continue this cycle until someone finally stops them. She notes that many will die before bounty hunters finally execute the pair. The girl debates killing them now as her murderous aura terrifies the mercenaries. Radis sighs and rubs her head, momentarily frustrated by the situation. She offers them mercy, stating she will let them off on one condition. The red-haired girl warns that if they lie, she will hunt them down. The scarred man recounts a story from 10 years ago involving knights in the forest. He explains how the armored men left their horses and entered a hidden cave. They hoped for treasure, but the armored group never emerged from the cave. The man notes only a cloaked figure holding a child eventually came up. They explored the cave later, discovering a tunnel that connects to the Forbidden Zone. Believing their explanation is enough, the mercenaries prepare to take their leave. Radis halts their departure by pointing her sword directly at the scarred man's chin. She orders them to return the egg to its original location immediately. The mercenaries agree frantically, surprised by the girl's decision to spare them. Entering the tunnel, Radis realizes this is a professionally constructed passage. She notes the quality of the architecture suggests hundreds of workers were involved. The girl wonders how an ancient site remains so remarkably well-preserved. Radis reveals her plan to use the secret route into the Forbidden Zone. She tells them to confess their fraud, promising to help them find legitimate work. The eye-patch man questions why a noble lady would bother helping people like them. Radis walks through the darkness, thinking she acts not out of a sense of justice, but to prevent the meaningless death of innocents. Radis notes they are almost there while recognizing the glowing script on the floor. The girl identifies the ruins as a place imbued with ancient magic similar to the gate. The exhausted mercenaries complain about walking for half a day through the timeless darkness. Narration emphasizes that the estate staff will be frantically searching for the girl by the time she returns. Radis worries that her long absence will be difficult to explain as a simple walk to the staff. She considers using training with David to explain her mana use and sword skills to others.
Voices in the darkness express extreme disgust and fear over the spread of a poison.
Radis admits she is afraid to tell the Marquis about her recent activities and secrets. The girl fears that Marquis Rushel will begin to treat her like something filthy.
Radis decides to return home for now and contemplate her next move later. Radis commands the door to open, revealing the desolate mountain landscape beyond the ruins.
The girl realizes she has reached the heart of the Forbidden Zone and recognizes its reek of malice.
A soldier reports that the inspection team has vanished without leaving a single trace.
Fallen knights litter the ground as the group realizes something has gone terribly wrong. A panicked shout for the vice captain rings out while the red-haired girl looks on in shock. Gorse mockingly calls the girl unlucky and locks the door to leave her as monster food.